Welcome back. Earlier, Steve Johnson had an opportunity to interview Chris Papst. He's authored a very interesting book called Capital Murder. It's not what you think. Let's join Chris and Steve now.
Chris Papst is the author of a book called Capital Murder, an investigative reporter's hunt for answers in a collapsing city. And the city that he is focusing on is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And we go back to 2011. Chris, I want to ask you first, I mean, looking at the history, we have 1978, Cleveland became the first city in America to go bust since the Great Depression. And then about 54 cities and towns and counties also seeking protection from creditors since 1980. So let me ask you, you picked Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's probably off the radar of some people. Why did you pick that particular city?
Well, because of all the cities that you mentioned, and even since the beginning, the founding of our country, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is the only capital city ever to file for bankruptcy. And the significance of that is that capital cities are supposed to be recession-proof. That is where all the tax dollars from the state are going. And every day, tens of thousands of government workers go into Harrisburg to park, to pay taxes, to buy food and groceries. There's an economic built-in infrastructure that capital cities have that are supposed to make them immune to this type of financial crisis. So I wrote Capital Murder to show people how badly the finances in Harrisburg were actually run and what led to that city's epic financial collapse, so other cities don't do the same thing.
Okay, now it really wasn't that long ago, and I think we tend to think in the 1970s it seemed like there was a lot of economic downturn that caused a lot of major cities to have these problems. Looking at Harrisburg, I know that there's some allegations of corruption and all sorts of things, but when you're looking at this, especially being a capital city, as you mentioned, what were the mistakes you saw that could possibly be repeated, I suppose, by any other city in the future?
Oh, absolutely. Now, yeah, sure. It wasn't that long ago Harrisburg filed for bankruptcy. It was October of 2011, and I was an investigative reporter in that city working for the CBS affiliate. And the timeline there is what was most interesting to me. So you have this timeline of financial collapse. And if you read the book and you look at the book, you can see what this timeline was and how the city went from, okay, well, we're just kind of getting in a little bit too much debt here. We're taking on too much leveraging of our monies. We're building too many things that possibly we can't afford. And then it starts getting into, well, now we don't have the money to repair streetlights. Now we don't necessarily have the money to maintain our police force. Now we have to cut firefighters. Now we don't have the money to repair sinkholes. Now large blocks are being abandoned because we don't have the money to maintain the infrastructure and the utilities of that block. So it was this timeline that I could clearly see happening up until October of 2011. When the city filed for bankruptcy. So in Capital Murder, people can see where their municipality is in this timeline. And as I studied this more, and as I looked at more cities around America, I noticed that a lot of them are following the same exact path. They're doing a very similar thing. The consequences are very similar, and we can see these parallels. So in Capital Murder, you can see where your town is, what mistakes you're making compared to what mistakes Harrisburg made, and hopefully you can stop it before it gets to the point of that financial collapse. Because when that happened in Harrisburg, when it filed for bankruptcy, the people of that city suffered. The quality of life for the people living in Harrisburg drastically declined. Now, I did not live in Harrisburg. I worked there for 4 years. But going into it every day and watching the suffering of the people, from sports being cut at the high school and middle school to entire blocks having to be abandoned because the city couldn't fill sinkholes and repair the utilities. It was awful, and it didn't have to happen.
You know, the scenario you laid out, although it can affect other cities, you were talking about overreaching your credit, spending money you don't have, seeing the infrastructure going down. I mean, not only is this a problem for cities, but this sounds like what really the federal government is up against, as our $13 trillion plus in indebtedness continues too. So isn't this all? Let's standardize this, globalize it a little bit more. This is a national problem too from our federal government, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, this is not a problem with central Pennsylvania where Harrisburg is. This is not a problem with Pennsylvania. This is not a problem with the Northeast or the East Coast. This is a problem, as you said, nationally. We as Americans are being conditioned to just borrow, Just borrow money, leverage yourself. It's a lot easier to leverage yourself than it is to work hard and acquire the capital that you need to be prosperous. But that's not the message that we're getting. That's not the message that we're getting from our federal government. That's not the message that we're getting from our states. And it's trickling all the way down to our local municipalities and our cities. And it's dangerous. And if more cities do what Harrisburg did, it's the problem here is catastrophic. Harrisburg is a city of 49,000 people. It is a capital city of the 5th or 6th largest state in the country, population-wise. Pennsylvania is. But relatively, it's a small city. But when Harrisburg went bankrupt, it had an impact across the country because the municipal bond market is not very big. There's only so many banks and Wall Street bankers and consultants and attorneys that deal in the municipal bond market. So when you have one or two municipalities or cities that are going bankrupt, it disrupts the entire thing. Interest rates can be affected. Just the ability to get that money can be affected. Now, if we have more Harrisburgs, we have more cities that are affecting that municipal bond market, and interest rates are fluctuating as a result of that, and the money becomes more difficult to get. Now you can have a situation where the entire country is struggling just because a few cities fall. And you're absolutely correct. It is not a Harrisburg issue. It is an American issue, and we need to get a hold of this before it gets too far down the road, or we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
All right, I want to mention we're talking with Chris Papst. He's the author, he's a reporter and author of the book Capital Murder, an investigative reporter's hunt for answers in a collapsing city. You brought up within the book how the media and citizens who didn't seem to care played a role in all of this. Elaborate a little bit on that. In this Harrisburg scenario, what did you see take place with those two entities?
Well, sure. You even mentioned going back to the 1970s that our cities were struggling, and Harrisburg was your typical Rust Belt town. In the 1970s, it lost 25% of its population, and that's 25% of the population that can afford to leave, taking their tax dollars with them. Well, in 1982, a new mayor came in. And he ended up being mayor for 28 years. And what this man did in the city looked remarkable. He took over a city in 1982 that was really struggling, and he started over-leveraging. But in the process of over-leveraging, he put that money back into the city. He reinvested it into the city, into bringing a minor league baseball team to town, building stadiums for the baseball team and the soccer team, building universities and museums and high-rises, and new bars and restaurants were coming to town. The downtown was getting vibrant. The Whitaker Center for the Performing Arts. He was doing wonderful things in the city, and that's all that the people saw. That is all that the media wanted to see. They wanted to see this city thrive. And from 1982 to 2010, it did thrive under this mayor. But nobody wanted to see the amount of debt that he was actually racking up. And 1 year after he leaves office in 2011, 1 year after being mayor for 28 years, the city has this remarkable financial collapse because nobody wanted to see what was actually happening to the finances of the city. All they wanted to see was the new buildings, the baseball teams, and the new institutions that were coming to town. And the people just let him do whatever he wanted. I say in Capital Murder that he became a dictator, and he did. He had created the trust within the people, and they could see for themselves the progress that he was creating, and nobody wanted to get in the way of it.
Okay, now, I see a national scenario there. I see a lot of people who are saying, we need to keep a level of benefits, whatever that is, coming to us because we're the taxpayers, so we need to get money back from our government. Meanwhile, our indebtedness keeps rising. At some point, I know nationally, our indebtedness will be such that we can't even start paying the interest, let alone the principal on that, and we've heard that we're getting close to that. Juxtapose that, if you would, with Harrisburg. At what point did they realize that there was a problem that had to be dealt with and they were too far gone? Because it was apparently after this mayor had left office. What was the wake-up call there?
I think the wake-up call was that they couldn't pay their people anymore. The employees of the city could no longer get paid, and the city had to start making choices. We either pay our police officers or we no longer pay our debt. And the option was just those two. And the city chose to pay its employees. And then as they stopped paying their debt, and it started with one or two debts, again, this is the timeline that we're talking about. It started with one or two smaller debts they were no longer paying. Well, then the city gets sued by those creditors. And then they have to start issuing tax liens, and they have to start bringing in money 1 or 2 years before it was actually due to the city for the next payroll. And then they stopped paying more debtors. And then it got to the point where every single entity that had money tied up in Harrisburg in the form of debt, none of them were getting paid any longer. And the city was struggling just to be able to pay the employees, the dwindling number of employees that it had, because it had to cut employees, fire, police, and other employees in the city, just so they could keep up the basic services. And at that point, you said, there is no other solution here. We tried a bunch of different things. This city has to go bankrupt. It does not have any other feasible option to try to get this city back onto its feet. And that's what City Council did in October of 2011, making history.
Looking back at what led up to that point, was there no voice of alarm that was being sounded, or was there and no one paid attention? Fantastic
question. Why would there be a voice of alarm? You have this mayor of 28 years. In 2006, put this into perspective. In 2006, the World Mayor Organization, which is a group of people globally that put a ranking together of the greatest leaders in the world, they named Harrisburg's mayor the greatest mayor in America and the third greatest mayor in the world. This is 2006 because of everything that he had done in the city. So the people of Harrisburg see this thing come out saying, we have the greatest mayor in America. 5 years later, the city goes into bankruptcy. People didn't want to look at what he was really doing. He was getting all of these accolades. He was someone that was this godlike figure. He was this politician that in a crowded room, he could talk to you and make you feel like he's having a one-on-one conversation. He was charming. He was charismatic. He was attractive. He was somebody that just had that God-given ability to control a room, to get people motivated, and to get to people to love him. And so nobody wanted to see what he was really doing. I know it's hard to imagine, and as an investigative reporter in that city, I had a really difficult time coming to grips with this. But it wasn't until I understood how much power this man actually had that I was able to start doing more investigative reporting on what he was doing and how he was shuffling around money and how he was taking out bonds to pay off bonds that he took out years prior. It wasn't until then that I started to realize, okay, this is a huge problem. This is a book that needs to be written so people understand what happened inside of this city. But yeah, I know that you can't, a lot of people, when I do these interviews, ask me that question. Why wasn't anybody looking at him? And there was just no reason to. Everybody loved him. Everybody trusted him. And like any other form of dictatorship, whether it be a country or whether it be a city, that form of government does not work. And Harrisburg is just the latest example of that.
All right, just briefly, has anything changed to prevent this from happening in another city?
Well, the state government of Pennsylvania held hearings like politicians like to do, and they paraded a bunch of people through the state legislature over a couple of days, but nothing's happened as a result of that. This mayor, after my book came out, has been charged by the Pennsylvania Attorney General. The point of my book is that Harrisburg was financially murdered, but apparently nobody killed it because no one had ever been held accountable. A few months after my book came out, he now faces 499 charges of corruption and theft and racketeering. So things are happening now, and he could possibly go to jail, which does send a message that, hey, we're not going to allow our politicians to do that. But more importantly, the Attorney General of Pennsylvania is also looking at Wall Street because much like in the housing crisis that we had, people were being loaned money they shouldn't have been loaned. In this instance, Harrisburg was being loaned money by Wall Street. It should never have been loaned. So the Attorney General is looking at Wall Street criminally for what they did to Harrisburg. And the governor of Pennsylvania is looking at Wall Street civilly for what it did to Harrisburg, saying, hey, we need to get some of this money back that was taken from our city and given to Wall Street. So you combine those two things. And if the Attorney General of Pennsylvania and the governor of Pennsylvania are looking at Wall Street in this way, this could have huge impacts throughout America, because it could save more cities, because instead of Wall Street just loaning and loaning and loaning money to our municipalities, it could finally say, hey, you know what, maybe we shouldn't loan this money, because if we do, we could be held responsible for it if the city goes bankrupt. And that is the big news that's coming out of Harrisburg right now that can affect America.
We will be following that. Yeah, thank you. Chris Papst, the author of the book Capital Murder, an investigative reporter's hunt for answers in a collapsing city. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
What a fascinating story. All right, coming up next, we're delighted to have back with us Liz Peek. She is a columnist for FoxNews.com and the Fiscal Times, talking about the presidential debate coming up next here on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.